This morning on Media and Society, we discuss expanded defamation as Twitter posts result in a hefty fine for a columnist. And misinformation online results in calls for social media education programs. Well, hello and welcome to Media and Society right here on SABC News, independent and impartial. I'm Naledi Mulao with you until 10 o'clock this Sunday morning. This is, of course, the show that looks at what the media feeds you and how that impacts on you. So feel free to get in touch with us on Twitter. Use the hashtag SABC Media Society. And of course, over the next hour, we're always keen to get your calls. So call us on 011-714-6841. Let's get into our discussion for this morning. So in the past, it's largely media organizations who'd face defamation cases because they're the ones who'd write about other individuals. But with the advent of social media, that really has changed, right? With just a smartphone, we're all now publishers of information. But what if what we publish tarnishes an organization or an individual's reputation? Recently, former Daily Maverick contributor Mudiba Mudibe was ordered to pay 100,000 rand to the publication after a series of tweets. Joining me to discuss defamation, especially in the digital age, we have back with us in studio once again Dr. Pranola Govardhan, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Johannesburg Institute for Advanced Study at the University of Johannesburg. We're also joined by Kelumo Sakubeka, who is a candidate attorney at Radasi Sekhaja Attorneys. Ladies, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Naledi.
Good morning, Naledi. Thank you for the invite.
So, let's go back to the case that I stated actually in that intro, right? We saw the Daily Maverick essentially publishing just about 5 days ago saying that they're celebrating the win in the defamation case against Mudiba Mudibe. If we go back to the genesis of that story, Mudiba Mudibe allegedly going out onto Twitter saying that the publication was encouraging him to write anti-black columns. The publication saying, no, you're ruining the reputation of the Daily Maverick. Did you see that story and what did you make of it?
I actually did see, I read about it in Biz Community and Ground Up Naledi when the story came out. And I think we need to take a closer look because it's very interesting. At first glance you read and the headlines say that the Daily Maverick has been vindicated. So one would then think, okay, so they did actually not, they cleared off these very serious allegations of racism that basically the Daily Maverick were publishing stories that would criticize black leaders in the ANC and EFF. But if you look closer at the judgment, which I did, the High Court judgment that came out last week, they were actually, not, in my view, not vindicated because Mudibe chose not to engage at all with the proceedings. So we do need to look closer at was vindication done, was justice being done, and it's important to look closer at this.
Yeah. Well, do you think, though, that the tweets by Mudiba Mudibe do at least have the hint of defamation in them?
Absolutely. So according to the judgment and what came out last week, the tweets were done 2 years ago in January 2020, and in a post-apartheid climate such as this, and our past of painful, traumatic, dehumanizing, institutionalized racism, you cannot just flagrantly just say that a publication is guilty of racism and then not give any proof. So in my view, it is defamation because it was a big tarnish to the reputation of the Daily Maverick. However, at the same time, I think Mudibe does have a right to make these allegations, but I believe it was done on the incorrect platform. And then when he had the opportunity to go to the High Court and give evidence, he didn't.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say it was done on the incorrect platform. And as we started the show, this is really what I was talking about there, isn't it? It's that understanding of the fact that we all now have the power to publish, and we actually need an understanding of what defamation is and how to not land ourselves in hot water. Can we start with the definition? Because we can't assume that everyone in South Africa knows what defamation of character is.
Naledi, to give you a clear definition of defamation in the sense that we in social media and a platform that everyone would understand, I would put it as an unlawful, publication of a statement about a person, by another person, about another person. So putting it in that frame of definition, it puts you in a position where you can see where the elements come in, the unlawfulness. What do we require as unlawful? What do we see as unlawful? When it's unlawful, we're looking at intent. Now, when we're looking at intent, we're looking at were you intending to put the statement out in the sense of you intending to tarnish the name of a company, a person, a natural person, or a jurisdiction? Because now when you put it in the terms that it's from one person to another, it's no longer limited in the sense that media is limited to the point where it's just the media as big houses. Now we have that platform where publishing is put on a platform where it's just sending out a tweet, it's just putting it on social media. Back then we had it was limited in the sense that it was only the media who had the platform to publish things, put it on bigger screen, put it on newspaper, put it on, and when that was the case, we had people verifying information. So now we have a place where we're in social media, and with social media, anyone can publish information. And once I publish my information, it's what I'm saying. And now the thing is, when it gets to the public, understanding my opinion in a statement, that's now where it gets tricky, because if I'm saying, I think, that's something else. If I'm saying the statement as he put it in his statements, that this is what happened, and now he had to appear in court and prove his facts, that no, these facts are actually true. What I said, I'm trying to escape liability in the sense that this was true and I can prove it in this way. So in this case, he did not even appear, and he just decided not to appear, and hence the default judgment in such a case.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said, though, around the flip of things that we're starting to see, right? I mean, I looked at some of the previous cases, what history South Africa has of defamation against media houses, or media houses between media houses and individuals. And I came across one example, for instance, of last year we saw Minister Fikile Mbalula accusing a ground-up reporter of defamation because of alleged involvement in what is the National Lottery scam. And really, the minister essentially saying, I had no role to play. The publication itself saying, well, we didn't directly implicate you. But what was interesting, it was the individual against the publication. It's interesting when you're starting to see the publications then. I mean, is that something that is we see quite irregular, where you've got the Daily Maverick saying, no, he is defaming a publication?
That comes from the definition itself, when it says another person about another person. So now we're looking at the definition of the person within the context of the definition. The person now is not just a natural person, wherein it's just Mudiba, who's just a person, who's just someone, a natural person, I'll put it in legal terms. And we look at the business. So when you're looking at business, we're looking at a juristic person. This person also has the right to be sued and sue. So they can also bring a suit to someone else. So these persons that we're referring to, we're not just referring to just natural persons. Now we have the game of natural persons and big media houses, and vice versa. So if the statement is defamatory to my business, to my trade, and to myself and my dignity, that's when I can say, no, this remark has been defamatory in the sense that it has infringed on my rights to trade. In certain senses, it's also to trade and to be...
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wonder, though, if the viewer, the consumer of media, cares. And I ask that genuinely, right? When I'm watching at home and I'm just a normal South African and I'm watching and I hear that a minister is accusing a publication of defamation, or a columnist is accusing, or the other way around with what we've seen with Mudiba and the Daily Maverick, does the viewer care? Does it impact what they think of any of these parties?
Well, just to add on to what you were saying, if you look at South African law and how what courts use in terms of what counts as defamation, they use an objective test. So what they look at is basically by definition, what would an ordinary, what would a regular reader of ordinary intelligence, what meaning would they make of this?
Yes.
And it's a two-part test. That's the first one. And then the second one, does it count as injury to defamation? So in this case, with the Daily Maverick, although that there was a default judgment, they looked at, right, ethically, what does it mean? They're going to think that the Daily Maverick is unethical. They've got a racist campaign. So how the courts look at it is, what meaning will you take out of it? And then does it count as injury to your reputation? And I also just want to add that I think you've mentioned individuals and now not just publications. I think social media as well has significantly changed the space of defamation, because there was actually a landmark case in 2011, which was LaRue versus Ray. I'm sure you know about it. And that was basically a bunch of students at a school that put together sexual images of a teacher and their principal. It was two males in a sexually suggestive position. And there, the Constitutional Court actually ruled that they're going to actually extend the media to not only publications, anybody that uses WhatsApp, that is a comment on news media, that is on Instagram, and even if you share that defamation, you also are held liable. So the courts don't really care about yes, it is at play, but if it's defamation, what meaning will you get from it?
Yeah, I'm interested. So let's go back to the question I asked earlier, though. So as you started that thought, and I'm glad you clarified, but that is, does the viewer care? So does the viewer think, does the viewer in South Africa, in your view, really think, oh, well, hold on, is there an issue with Daily Maverick, or you know, is there an issue with Mudiba Budibe? Do you think that South Africans have that discussion?
I don't think so. I think someone like Modibe, who I think my understanding also currently he's got a following of 100,000 on Twitter, and 2 years ago he had a following of 50,000. So I think, and for me also, I think what resonated with his allegations with me is it was grossly unfair, and he did it on the incorrect platform. However, in post-apartheid media, it's not the first time that our newspapers have been accused of being anti-black in its criticisms of leadership. My own research actually found in the first 20 years of democracy that if you have to look at the representation of black leadership and the ANC, it has very colonial tropes. Nelson Mandela himself said in 1994 that the way in which black leadership is represented has got a continuing racism.
Can we stop? I want to finish that thought, but I've got a caller who's been on the line for a while, but I really want to go back to that thought. Anonymous on the line in the Eastern Cape. Anonymous, good morning to you.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yes, thanks for calling. What are your thoughts?
I've got a problem with, there's a Sunday Times published a very damning article about myself that accuses me of being incompetent, corrupt, and I don't know what else they've been accused me of. And funny thing about it is that when they contacted me, I produced all the proof of the allegations, including court documents. And the person that was in concern with the article that I was alleging against produced nothing. But Sunday Times went to town against facts, against evidence. On the day when the article came out, I informed them that this is not right, and I told them where did you get the information, because the other person I called, and the other person said the information they said on the paper, I did not supply, meaning that Sunday Times I had my truth, the other party had their truth, Sunday Times had their truth. And then their truth is defamatory to me, and they couldn't explain. So in the process, what we were trying to find each other, because I was producing more proof, because they didn't know I taped the interview. So I produced the tapes that are taped, their own journalists lying. So I said to them, don't print anything further up until we find each other in terms of where is the lies and so on, so the apology can be meaningful. I wake up, there's an apology, and even this apology is printed over the defamatory text of the original statement or of the original article. And it's been 3 years. From 2019, they blocked me on the phones. They can't take accountability that they blacklisted me. As a result, I can't find alternative job, because for 3 years now, Sunday Times have put that paper. And I told them that you know that normally your articles are republished. So if you leave this article longer, it's going to be republished. As I'm sitting now, it has been published in 12 other publications.
Sure. Anonymous, thank you for calling in. What does she do?
What does she do? What usually happens when someone feels like they've been defamed by someone else? They put in an institute. It being a claim for damages. It cannot be brought to court in terms of criminal law. So it's brought to court in a civil suit. In a civil suit, they institute summons. In her summons, as the plaintiff, she puts in the defamatory remarks. She puts in how they have affected her. And now with her situation where you find that she has already told us that she's lost her job, she's already told us how it has affected her, she'd have two claims. She'd have in terms of patrimonial loss, and she'll have one of non-patrimonial loss. So your patrimonial loss would be basically due to the fact that she's lost her income. She can quantify that in the course of this, because of these remarks that have not been proven for a certain amount of time, I've actually lost about 60,000 per annum because of this. And then in her second claim, she can put now how this has tarnished her good name, how this has tarnished her reputation, how her infringement to her constitutional right has been infringed, her right to dignity. How now does the society view her in light of all these defamatory remarks?
Okay. Yeah, you wanted to step in there, Doc.
Yes, I also just wanted to add, because I know in the beginning of the show that I mentioned Modibo did it on the wrong platform, and I know today we're talking about when the media is taken to court, but I also find it quite interesting that we actually do have a press council in South Africa that are the formal regulatory mechanism that is meant to oversee things like this. And the Sunday Times, it's not the first time they've been accused. It's been ongoing, even in the 90s. Mantu Shabalala Msimang also took beef with them for depicting her as a drunk on the job, and she argued, but it's not actually in the public interest. And this has actually been something the ANC has also criticized the press council for, saying that you're actually quite toothless. You're a volunteer mechanism, and you do so much of damage. You put something on the front cover, and then there's a small little complaint system. So I think arising out of today's show, it's also important to look at where do we go forward in terms of our media, and what are the correct platforms, and where can we get justice, and do we feel in this case and in the case of the court, was vindication done? Was the 100,000 rand that Modibo still has to pay, is the Daily Maverick vindicated in the eyes of the public?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Press Council, because just to clarify for our viewers, actually, we did invite them to this discussion, and they told us that they were unable to make it this week and possibly in the future, even though, things are quite timeous. And we did also invite the Daily Maverick. They were also unable to provide a guest for us. Modibo himself was also invited, also told us that he is unable to join this discussion. But we need to get the conversation going anyway, because we have to continue to educate and inform our viewers. And we're going to continue doing that on the other side of this break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Media and Society, and thank you so much for joining us on this Sunday morning. We continue our discussion as we talk defamation and the media, as well as social media. Remember, we're always taking your calls on 011-714-6841. In fact, let's take a caller now. We've got on the line Dr. Surprise Ndenga from KwaZulu-Natal. Dr. Ndenga, good morning to you. Thanks for calling.
Good morning, ma'am. How are you?
I'm well, yes. What are your thoughts?
So what I was wondering is that in a country full of opinionated people supported by their freedom of speech, how do we thicken that line between giving your opinion about something or about an event and defaming a person in the process? So how do we thicken that thin line? Because you may think you are giving an opinion, but actually you are now defaming a person's character.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I see, so you put your hand up for that one.
Yes, we have what we have in society. We have in our constitution, basically, we have the right of freedom of speech. Now, when it comes to freedom of speech, we need to remember that with my rights, I have obligations and responsibilities towards others. And when my freedom of speech now exceeds to the point where it infringes on someone else's right, that's when it becomes the problem. That's where the defamatory comes in. Because what you're saying now is affecting my right to a good name and my dignity. So my opinion of something should be limited in that sense that if I'm giving, for example, our social media platforms, if I'm giving an opinion, it's words like I think, I believe. You need to put it in the opinion sense that it's my opinion. However, when you put it in the statement, as we have with our Daily Maverick person. He was more of the idea that this is what happened, and saying it as in a statement of fact. But when it came to him proving that, he was unable to do that.
Yeah, you want to step into that one as well?
Yes, I just want to add, also shortly after our constitution was enshrined in law in 1994, the Supreme Court of Appeal came up with something called the reasonable clause, which now not only applies to publication but also social media users. And that basically also protects and tries to balance our constitutional right of freedom of expression and protecting the dignity of individuals. And there, if you can show that, and Julius Malema tried to do this, it was Julius Malema and Boyaseni, of the EFF versus Trevor Manuel in 2019. I'm sure you know about those tweets. And they also tried to argue for, but this is reasonable, we're whistleblowers, it's in the public interest. However, if the information is false, then here lies the problem. It can't be an opinion and then it's false and then it tarnishes a person's reputation.
Yeah, and if it is an opinion, it needs to be proved.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. When I thought about it, especially with that question from Dr. Ndenge, I wondered if the issue is that perhaps what Modiba could have done is gone online and said, we have an issue with anti-black sentiment in the media, right? I mean, would that have been, and would he have faced less legal pressure?
Yes, I think, as I said in the beginning, in a public climate such as ourselves, accusing somebody or a publication of racism is huge, because in the same year in 2020, in January, when he tweeted this, months after we had the incident in September of the racist clicks advert, which basically centered a white woman's hair as normal, as fat and flat and fine, and then a black woman's hair
as dry and frizzy,
and abnormal, so to speak. And there were massive public protests across the country. The EFF even closed clicks. There were petrol bombings. So in a climate such as South Africa, in post-apartheid society, you cannot just accuse a publication of racism and leave it there. It's very dangerous, as the Daily Maverick themselves, Rebecca Davis, wrote after the publication. It's a very dangerous allegation, and you better have proof if you're going to say that on a public platform.
And then I want to bring it back to social media, because again, now on social media, you've got that question by Dr. Ndenga saying, well, where do I end up with I mean, we're blogging now, we're tweeting, we're doing all sorts of things. Have we seen, I'm wondering if we've actually seen a lot of social media defamation cases coming to the fore outside of some of the high profile ones that we all know about?
In this case, we have not seen as much between maybe socials. Well, we have the Shimza one, where Shimza was against Shimza and his then producer or manager at the time, wherein he had said some things about him which then was defamatory to his reputation. But other than that, it's something that someone should be cognizant of, that if I'm in the social media space and if I have an essential amount of followers, I should be very cognizant on what I put out online, because people look up to me and people think of me as an icon. So whatever I say could be taken as facts. So I think it's this case gave clear definition that you should not just say anything. You should qualify what you're saying.
Yeah, and I suppose, I mean, at this point, we already have a legal system that is so desperately clogged, right, that you almost need a more seamless way of dealing with these cases as they come. We're moving into very interesting political times in the country, where a year and a bit into or closer or approaching the next general elections, you know that the climate in the country is going to get quite interesting, especially on social media. Do we have the capacity in our legal system to deal with all of that? Or do we need easier ways of dealing with the defamatory statements that are shared on social media?
I'll take that. I think we do need better ways and fairer ways to deal with it. And I think we need more accountability, because we are sitting here today and this case all started with a tweet in 2020 alleging anti-black alleging racism against the Daily Maverick. And then the second tweet then said, actually, there were a group of students and Modiba himself that were paid 500 Rand a week in stipends. And then IOL, the biggest newspaper website in South Africa, a subsidiary of the Independent Group, then picked it up. And then this was retweeted by Julius Malema, by 3.6 million followers. IOL has 600,000 followers. So I don't think we've reached a stage where we are properly regulating social media, because even the landmark case of EFF versus Trevor Manuel in 2019, there EFF had to pay 500,000 rand, and Modibo still felt quite free to tweet this and then say, I'm not going to go to court. So I don't think we have enough accountability at this stage.
Yeah. What do you make of that 100,000 rand fine, though? Is that sufficient? I'm just wondering.
Well, when it comes to quantifying the damages, this is how it's done usually. If I'm the plaintiff, I come in and I say, where we find it with Daily Maverick, they actually wanted a 500,000, and the court only granted them 100,000. So when it comes to quantifying such the non-patrimonial damage to the business or the trade or to someone, the court looks to numerous factors: the seriousness of this defamation, the likelihood that it would have damaged someone's reputation to a certain extent, the social standing of the person saying that they've been defamed. Well, that causes the influence, and of course whether the person has defended the matter or not. Those are certain things that the court looks at when looking into the quantum of such damages.
I think I'm going to move towards wrapping it up, but I'm wondering just lessons in what we take out of Modiba versus the Daily Maverick, lessons for media houses particularly, but also for contributors of media houses such as columnists and ourselves.
I think what I would like to say is that in post-apartheid South Africa, we've long reached past Nelson Mandela's 1994, this new democracy. I think it's very important to look at if we do have allegations against the media of racism, which are very serious, I think it should not be swept under the carpet. We need to come up with mechanisms and platforms where this can be dealt with. Back in 2010, something similar happened where the South African Human Rights Commission actually investigated the media. It was in a report called Fault Lines, and those were allegations that were submitted by the Black Lawyers Association and accountants, and that was investigated. Here, we didn't have a platform, a correct platform. So I think going forward, we need to look at what are the correct platforms we can take up racism allegations in South Africa against our media.
Yeah, very, very good point. For you?
Well, in this case, I would just say that the ignorance of the law is no excuse. We find that he ignored his summons. He knew that there was a summons against him. He tweeted about it and just did nothing about it, hoping we would not know what he was hoping for, but that doesn't stop the plaintiff from continuing with its action, and therefore social personalities should be very much aware of that.
Yeah. Ladies, thank you so much for speaking to us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks to my guest, Celu Musakubeka, who is a candidate attorney at Radasi Sekhaja Attorneys, as well as Dr. Pranola Govenden, a postdoctoral research fellow at the Johannesburg Institute for Advanced Study at the University of Johannesburg. So we've talked a lot about how you behave on social media and making sure that you don't defame anyone as you go out and publish your thoughts on those platforms or any other platform that you may be on. But for us to get there, I suppose one needs a level of media and even social media education, and that's what we're going to get into on the other side of this. So stay with us. Welcome back to Media and Society. So, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in South Africa, a lot of untrue information was shared. We remember this, right? There were videos that claimed that 5G causes COVID. Remember that? 5G had not even launched in South Africa, and when it was launched, people then started torching 5G towers in areas like KwaMashu and KwaZulu-Natal. Now, this belief in false information was then spread to COVID-19 treatment, right? Now, this false information got the Kenyan government concerned ahead of this year's election, as they even threatened to shut down Facebook. So the University of Cape Town and the University of Sheffield say online media literacy must be implemented in schools. Africa Check hopes to offer media literacy education as well to South Africans. And joining me to discuss media literacy is Karina van Wyk, the Head of Education and Training at Africa Check. We're also joined by Professor Herman Wasserman from the Center for Film and Media Studies at the University of Cape Town, as well as Dr. Danny Madrid Morales from the University of Sheffield. Guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Naledi.
This is such an important discussion, right? I'm going to start with you, Karina, because ladies first, right? It's our month. I talk about the examples that I've just made, all the way from 5G all the way up to the Kenyan elections, and it goes on and on and on and on. Should we have had this discussion a long time ago?
I think it's an ongoing discussion and it's becoming more and more important. I think especially during the time of COVID, since the COVID pandemic, the breakout of COVID, we've seen this overabundance of false information online. Spreading on social media, on WhatsApp, on all kinds of different online platforms. So I think it's becoming more and more important by the day.
Yeah. And what's the true cost of false information being shared on social media, though? I think, Prof. Wasserman, I'm going to start with you, right? From some of the research that you've done at UCT and what you're finding with the narratives in the country, is there a true cost?
Yes, definitely. I think we saw that you mentioned COVID. It was clear that disinformation played a big role in things like vaccine hesitancy, just a general anxiety around the virus. People didn't know what news to trust, where they should get their information from. So it definitely has an impact on people's everyday lives. It has an impact on the news media because it can undermine trust just in information generally. So I think it has definitely has a strong implications for media and society in South Africa.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear if the 5G narrative was just a South African one, or if we were hearing this across the world. Dr. Madrid Morales?
So that's something that we've seen spread, specifically the 5G narrative that you were mentioning, right? Something that did not start in South Africa, but made its way to South Africa. And that's probably a characteristic of disinformation worldwide, not just COVID-19 disinformation, but you see narratives that start somewhere far away from a country, and then they trickle into the country through social media. And some of them, particularly the 5G narrative or vaccine disinformation that we've seen also in South Africa, started elsewhere, and then it's adopted by those that want to spread that message. And some of these narratives are very old, and we've seen them repeat themselves again and again. And that's probably one of the reasons why it's so important to teach people how to spot and identify these type of narratives, because with a very little effort and just quick search on Google, you'll find that some of the images that we saw around vaccines and so on, you could have seen that had been going on around social media for years, and therefore it's unlikely to be true.
Yeah, I'm going to stay with you, Dr. Madrid Morales, because I'm interested to hear some of the various approaches that we saw then being taken across the world to deal with misinformation, particularly at the height of COVID-19 with that even 5G narrative. And we can get into it here in South Africa. But we saw South Africa trying to legislate against misinformation, not very successfully, but we tried.
Yeah, we've seen a spike in the number of countries that are trying to put forward legislation. One of the very few countries that started doing that was Singapore. And then from a Singapore law that was passed a couple of years ago, many other countries have tried to imitate the same sort of legislative approach. We've seen Uganda, we've seen Nigeria, and we've seen some European countries as well trying to adopt that kind of legislation. Now, what one must ask themselves is, what are the consequences of that type of legislation? Sometimes some of these laws leave a very vague definition of what's false information, or maybe they leave the power of deciding what's true and what's false in the hands of governments. And therefore, that poses very significant problems for freedom of expression. We've seen some cases in which bloggers would present some corruption cases in some parts of the world, and then they are accused of spreading disinformation, even though that's factually true. So it is a bit of a tricky balance, the one you have to strike between putting forward legislation that's going to curb the spread of disinformation, but then deciding who is the arbiter, the referee, the person who's going to decide, oh, this is true or this is not. And maybe that's when we need independent bodies that are not connected to governments that are going to be doing that. Otherwise, we'll end up with situations where freedom of expression would be curtailed significantly.
Yeah, I wonder, because you talk, Dr. Madrid Morales, about how in some cases there was the vague definition of what false information actually is. And that's, I mean, it is quite blurry, isn't it?
It is such a difficult thing to define.
Oh, sorry, that was for Karina. Sorry, doctor. Sorry, that was for Karina.
Oh, sorry, I cannot see you. My apologies.
No, that's my fault. Don't worry about it. Go ahead, Karina.
Can you just repeat the question?
The definition of false information in and of itself can be seen as quite blurry, as vague, right? I mean, what actually constitutes false information versus, say, opinion or idea?
So that is part of the training that Africa Check offers, as we look at the information landscape and how information spreads, and then specifically how false information spreads. And then as a fact-checking organization, we look at mostly at two types of false information. So your disinformation and your misinformation.
Right.
And disinformation is deliberately shared, so with intent. So somebody knows that they're sharing false information and they share it in any case. While misinformation is often, this is people who look at false information, they don't critically think about it, they don't think, okay, but is this really true, before they send it. And that's a big problem, and that's where the need for training comes in, because we want to teach the public to not just simply believe information that they look at, but to actually ask, is this true?
Yeah.
Where does this come from?
Yeah.
What's the source? Is it a credible source, before you actually share that information? And once you understand how dis and misinformation works and why people share it and how they share it, then you can address the problem, and then you can start fact-checking.
Yeah, I remember at the height of COVID, as that 5G narrative was getting louder and louder, we saw, I think it was the Command Council essentially making an announcement in the country, in South Africa, that anyone who publishes information about COVID-19 without having verified that information could actually face a legal recourse in the country. We didn't see a lot of those cases come to the fore, but there was that discussion in South Africa. Was that the right way to go about it, to legislate?
I think that goes back to what Dr. Madrid Morales was saying, that it's a grey area. It's a very grey area, because on the one hand, you don't want people to spread false information. On the other hand, you also want people to have freedom of expression. You want freedom of the media, and some governments will abuse or might abuse that situation, and start curbing the spread of information that maybe doesn't favor them.
Yeah.
So it's a very grey area.
Yeah. Professor Herman Wasserman, this isn't something that's over yet in South Africa, is it? I mean, we've got the whole narrative around South Africans versus foreign nationals in the country. I've certainly have seen clips that go around talking about how foreign nationals are in a Hillbrow with arms preparing to go to war. These are things that are being shared on social media, and quite alarming and when you see just how far these things can spread. So we're not out of the woods just yet, are we, Prof?
No, absolutely not. And the example you mentioned, xenophobia, is also on the spectrum of mis and disinformation and bad information. So sometimes some of these images might be shared out of context, for instance, or they might be from a different country altogether, or it might be partially true. So all these sort of information, and that's part of the misinformation literacy that we are trying to develop, is also to help people spot and help people to discern what information might be taken out of context, what information might be partially true or might be completely wrong. And something like xenophobia, hate speech, genocide, all of these sort of harmful types of speech are really also very important things to focus on, especially in our country, where we've seen so many incidents of violence against foreigners. And so that is definitely something to be concerned about, especially as we are going into the elections.
Yeah. Oh, yes. We're going into the elective conference. We're going into elections. It's going to be some interesting times in the country, Prof. So what does the program that you're working on actually look like? Let's get into it and what you're doing.
So what we have been doing is working with Africa Check is firstly to establish what is the need for media literacy and misinformation literacy in particular. So what we have looked at is trying to find out exactly what is being taught at schools, because partly this is a response to what you've mentioned earlier. One of the responses is to legislate and to regulate platforms and people spreading disinformation. Another approach is rather to educate people and to teach them the skills to themselves regulate and to be careful not to consume and spread disinformation. So what we've been doing is really focusing on misinformation literacy. And there's been a long history in the country, people that have been experts in doing media literacy. I'm thinking of, for instance, Media Monitoring Africa and the work that they've been doing among children in the media, etc. Africa Check has been doing important work as well. So what we're really doing is building on those previous work and focusing specifically on misinformation literacy at school level.
Yeah.
So we wanted to find out what are the needs for that. And now we are looking at testing some of the curriculum that we have been developing and seeing how people respond to that.
I would love to take a look at it as well. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue the discussion, but feel free to give us a call. The number 011-714-6841. What do you make of the idea of media literacy in our schools, right? 011-714-6841. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. So you're still watching Media and Society. My guests this morning are Karina van Wyk, the head of education and training at Africa Check. And Africa Check, of course, is hoping to offer media literacy education to South Africans. We're also joined by Professor Herman Wasserman from the Center for Film and Media Studies at the University of Cape Town, and Dr. Danny Madrid Morales from the University of Sheffield. Remember to be part of the discussion as well by giving us a call on 011-714-6841. And that is to share your thoughts on whether or not you think it's time for us to add media literacy to our schools. So really this idea essentially coming from Africa Check as the beginning, right? Saying to the two universities, we'll go and look at, what a curriculum perhaps would be shaped like?
So the research that Prof. Wasserman and Dr. Madrid Morales did forms part of a 2-year project that we're running called Becoming a Responsible Consumer of Media. And what it basically entails is teaching high school learners as well as journalism students at university level how to responsibly use information. So the needs assessment that they completed will basically help us to develop training material that can then be used in high schools and South African universities. And it's also going to be used to develop a training of trainers program for high school teachers. So Africa Check will then be doing fact-checking and media literacy training for a group of high school teachers, and they will then be able to go out and train their colleagues to also teach media literacy and fact-checking skills to their learners.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And Dr. Danny Madrid Morales, if I come back to you and I ask, as you continued some of this work in this project, surely along the way you looked at really the ages that this media literacy program would need to start. I mean, we've got 6-year-olds already that are, already all over YouTube. It's starting so early. At what point do we need to start introducing media literacy?
That's such an interesting question. So the project that we're working on is trying to develop materials from grade 8 onwards. But at the same time, one of the things that we've been finding out, the next stage in this project involves working with learners to see how they feel about these materials that Africa Check is working on. So one of the things that we found when we talk to learners is that maybe we need to start thinking that grade 8 is a bit too late to start learning some of these things, and that there might be a need to go earlier and earlier because some children are starting to use social media even without their parents knowing or the schools knowing at a very, very early age. And what learners are telling us is that, grade 8 is a good point to start learning about how to socialize online and so on, but maybe you need to start thinking that some of the foundations of being responsible user of the media, being safe online, need to start being said at a much earlier age. So maybe that's a debate that's needed, right? One of the things that we put forward in a report that we created a few months ago is that we need to have a national debate. Educators, policymakers, and NGOs need to sit together and start thinking what is the way forward for a proper national curriculum that is going to help not just high schoolers, but maybe children at an earlier age.
Yeah, it's interesting because now we're talking about the, the media literacy education being needed by a younger age group. And I'm starting to think if perhaps we need to even start talking about the elders as well and going a little bit older than grade 12. I mean, we just had a discussion about defamation on social media, where for me, the implications of doing something wrong on social media could be catastrophic. Right? And that education really isn't out there, even for political leaders and so much more. Prof. Wasserman, do you have anything to say about that? About how this isn't just about young people, that we could go into corporate organizations with this?
Absolutely. I think that is one of the things that we have to realize is that everybody these days are online in some part of their lives, but they're also exposed to disinformation almost everywhere. And so it definitely is something that's pervasive in society. That's also something that we have found in some of our research. People report a very high level of exposure to disinformation. So I would agree. And one of the things that we've also found in our needs assessment, the survey that we did with teachers, is that teachers themselves often find that they would like to teach more misinformation literacy, but they need more training, they need better materials, they need some guidance themselves. So also teachers have to be, there needs to be an ongoing process of equipping teachers with the skills to impart this knowledge to learners. So absolutely, I think it's something 100%. That has to cut across the board.
Yeah, let me take a call. We've got Kondile on the line from Mangaung. Kondile, good morning to you.
Morning, Naledi.
Yes, thanks for calling. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Naledi, look, you need to bring up a generation that is media literate, but a generation that is also critical. Because we can't just be consumers of media without being critical. So media literacy comes in between there, because if you really want to have a critical reader, a critical user, you can only be able to do that if you start, we start our kids at an early age through the introduction of the media literacy, and this cut up across generations, Naledi, because we have seen people who are unable to differentiate between fake news and real information. So for me, I would encourage this initiative to really take a toll and across generations.
I quite like that. That's a very important point. Thank you so much for that, Kondile in Mangaung. And this is really at the core of why we wanted to have this discussion is, are media consumers in South Africa critical? Because you are going to have the back and forth on social media about this media house is this or that media house is anti that or the other. But you need to have a media consumer in the country who's able to say, well, I can see beyond the nonsense and I can make up a mind, but I'm also critical of what I'm reading, right? And that's what Africa Check is for.
Yes. So as Africa's first independent fact-checking organization, we've been doing training since 2015. And we've trained more than 8,000 journalists, journalism students, civil society organizations, and the broader public in fact-checking and verification. Because there's no way that we can fact-check everything out there. And you just need to ask the right questions. Right. And then we can all be fact-checkers.
Yeah. And that's the thing. That's the responsibility that we all have, not just as journalists, but you as the consumer of media as well. Thank you so much to my guests. This is an ongoing discussion, and we look forward to seeing what your program does as well. Thank you for watching Media and Society. We hope that you'll join us again, same time, same place next week. From me and the rest of the team, good day and have yourselves a blessed Sunday.